Today we're going from this to this and doing a tactical deep dive into creating completely rusted out tracks as seen on my FT17 build. We're going to be making a real mess of things using different techniques, and in the end I'm going to show you a simple trick that creates the perfect metal sheen. But first we need to clean our tracks. I used isopropyl alcohol for this since I recently got banned from the kitchen, but soapy water works just as well. After that was dry, I started priming the tracks in a dark brown acrylic primer. Any primer or color will do. In fact, you might even get away with not priming the tracks at all. But I like to make sure we have a good solid foundation for all the upcoming steps. Plus, if I happen to miss a spot later on, at least there will be a dark brown base to act as a natural shadow. To keep things tactical, I use my highly custom precision track holder jig, a towel holder taped sideways. This way I can hit all the nooks and crannies while still working relatively fast. Once I was done, I let it dry overnight. Next I mixed up a dark grey base coat and thinned it to a milky consistency. Again, the exact color doesn't really matter, since we're going to cover most of it later anyway. You can go lighter or darker to match your project. After making sure all the track links were painted in the dark grey tone, we are ready to move to the rust tones. My loadout for today, purchased with my own money, includes this rust set from Live Color. You can use any brand if you like, but the pros seem to love these, so I figured I'd see what all the fuss was about. And honestly, I'm glad I tried them. The colors are spot on and they dry to a perfectly flat matte finish. Next we need some everyday modeling essentials, mostly sponges, a couple of old brushes and a collection of tweezers. And if you are as clumsy as I am, reverse action tweezers are a must, since we don't want soaked sponges flying across the workbench. We will also need a lot of paper towels with cute animals on them and some water. The foundation of this technique is heavily inspired by the work of Michael Rinaldi. I recently caught one of his live streams about rusty tracks and I really wanted to try out this technique myself. It's all about creating as many random layers of texture and working from light to dark, telling a story of a machine that went through time. If you are into weathering your scale models, you should definitely check out this channel. I will leave a link in the description. I started applying the first rust colors using the sponge technique. The sponge is a great tool to build up random spots of paint fast. Any sponge will do. The goal is to get the paint on. We're not exactly creating the next Bob Ross masterpiece here. After loading the sponge with paint, I dipped it in a bowl of water and wiped off the excess on a paper towel. And this is exactly why it's important to cover your desk. In this case, I borrowed a glass cutting plate from the kitchen, hence why I'm officially not allowed in there anymore. Which, to be honest, was a deliberate tactical move. Anyway, back to the tracks. The beauty of this technique is that it's fast, a lot of fun and almost impossible to get wrong. But every track type is different. These FT17 track links are so tiny that I couldn't reach every single spot with the sponge. So I went back in with a small brush and added washes from the same paint mix in all the hard to reach places until it looked right to me. The bright color might feel excessive, but it will tone down quite a bit when it dries. For a bit of extra randomness, I finished it off by speckling that same wash over the surface. Depending on your tracks, you can mix and match these methods or just stick to one. The only rule is to keep it random and have some fun with it. Let's move on to the second color. The best part is that we don't have to wait around to start the second layer. In fact, it actually helps if the previous layer is still a bit wet. This way the layers get mixed and create even more random textures. I use the same methods as with the first layer. But since I learned the effect will be toned down anyway when dry, I was a bit heavier on the application. Right now, these tracks don't look like much, but don't worry, it will all make sense in the end. Again, I mainly use the sponge for the track pads and the sides of the links, while sticking to speckling and washes for the inner sides. I did run into a few small problems though. The thin paint kept seeping through the gaps between the links, so I had to touch these up with a brush. But as you will see later on, this didn't work either. Despite this, acrylics are great. They don't smell funny and the tracks don't fall apart because of heavy finish or enamels. Okay, I take that back. But don't look at me. I'm special. I have 2 left hands. And in my defense, the FT17 tracks are genuinely very brittle. So this was a bad example. Despite this, I was feeling quite the Picasso and genuinely had a blast smearing and splashing on the rust colors. After I felt it was right for me, I moved on to the third color. By now, it's pretty obvious what the plan is. And since this is the third layer, I didn't want to completely hide all of our previous work. So I made sure to go a bit softer with the application this time. And if I applied too much, I just dabbed the area with a cotton bud to soak up the excess. This was possible since the paint was still heavily thinned. I also tried applying a wash between the links again, but the friction between them kept rubbing the paint off. I gave up and decided to postpone the whole thing until the tracks are fitted to the suspension frames. By now, the tracks are getting some nice random textures. And honestly, it is perfectly okay to stop right here. But since I bought 4 paints, we might as well use all of them. The last color is quite dark, and at this stage, I felt that this last step could either make or break the paint job. To keep it minimal, I stuck to speckling for the inner side of the links and only lightly tapped the other areas with a sponge. And here's the kicker. This time I used the dry paint and carefully chipped the surface with it. It gave the tracks an unexpected gritty look that I very much liked, so I fully committed to it. Finally, I mounted the tracks to the running gear of the FT17 and reworked the spots where the rust stones had been wiped away by friction. I genuinely love this technique already. All this with a bunch of acrylic paints. Amazing. I'm sure I will be using this technique in future builds. But something is still missing. Yes, you guessed it. Metal texture. What's better for creating a metal texture than a good old-fashioned pencil? I rubbed the pencil on a piece of coarse sandpaper and collected the graphite in a tray. It's cheap, easy, and creates the perfect sheen. Very tactical. Though it stains very easily. I really don't know what I was doing here. Anyway, I started rubbing the contact points using an artist silicone brush. These things are great, they're perfect for sculpting, but they absolutely excel at applying pigments. Already I was getting that steel shine we all love. This simple technique instantly transforms your model, giving depth, skill and realism. And if you not already noticed, I am a huge fan of this technique. I work my way through, making sure not to forget the sides of the tracks. But be careful when you load the brush. You only need tiny amounts of graphite. So before you hit the tracks with the graphite, make sure to wipe the excess on a paper towel first. But here is where things get interesting. If you apply too much, you can just erase it with, wait for it, an eraser. Shocker, right? It is amazing how simple household items can level up your skill models. Anyway, I noticed that the eraser can smear the graphite out, creating a very nice, warm, worn looking texture. But hey, don't mind me, I'm just a massive nerd for this stuff. I liked it so much that I used it on other parts of the tracks as well. I continued adding the graphite to the contact points, removing errors as I went. Of course, I did not forget about the inner sides of the tracks where most of the wear and tear naturally would occur. So this is the result so far. From here you can add your own weathering effects matching your projects. But let's take a brief look at how I finished these tracks for the FT17 build. First up, dust. I mixed a wash from pigments and odorless thinner and began applying this to the track pads. But since I am super impatient, I dried them in between sessions with a hairdryer. You can definitely leave them like this, but I felt the effect was a bit too strong for what I was aiming for, so I removed some of it with a makeup sponge. Then I added the same dust wash onto the sides and the inner sides, this time leaving it as is. After this, I speckled the thicker mud paste created from darker pigments and plaster onto the inner sides of the tracks. And lastly, I added the same mud paste on selective areas on the mounted tracks. This was my first time doing rust on tracks this way, but I think they turned out great. They look realistic, it's fun to do, and anyone can do it. What is your favorite technique for creating rust on tracks? Let me know in the comments. If you want to see the rest of the weathering on this FT17, make sure to check out the full episode. Don't forget to subscribe for more, keep those builds tactical, and see you guys in the next one.